Is something wrong, Gruff?
It's Giggles and her stupid control deck. I feel like I can't do anything.
Don't you play green? Why not play something like Thrun? Or something uncounterable?
She just bounces the spell back to my hand. Or just bounces everyone's boards. It's getting really obnoxious.
Well, my dearest Gruff, I think I've got just the thing for you.
Really? You'll make her stop playing that stupid deck?
No. Everyone should be allowed to play however they want. I don't want to restrict anyone's creativity. Plus, I also like countering more spells than clowns that can fit into a clown car. No. You just simply have to learn how to play around it.
But I don't play blue. And don't I need to counter her spells to stop her at this point?
Gruff. Sometimes you just need to get a little creative. Come on, I'll show you. Wait a minute, what about the rest of the pod? What did they think about it?
I think Veronica's still fighting through the clowns to get her in a rage.
Oh, jeez. Okay, let's get on this quick then. Good evening, darlings and deviants. My name is Lucy, and I'm just a little loony. And today, we're going to do another episode of Tools of the Tirade, the show where I give you some of the coolest tools to put in your commander decks. Today, I'll be going over the top 10 counterspells that aren't blue. These are some of the best ways to make your opponents think twice before casting their spell into open mana, no matter what deck you're playing. The one rule for this list is that there's no blue allowed, and they have to be counterspells specifically. No, well, technically a counterspell, or, well, if there's no more target, then it's no. None of that. Hard counters only, or it's stuff that you need to pay for to pay counters. Either way, counterspells, that's what we're looking at. So without further ado, let's start the show. First up on the list is Death Grip and Life Force at number 10. Death Grip is 2 black mana for an enchantment that lets you pay 2 black mana, again, in order to counter a green spell. Life Force is the same, but in reverse. So 2 green for an enchantment in order to counter a black spell. Death Grip has the slight advantage between these two, as green spells are some of the most popular in Commander, but black isn't too far behind. Being able to play actual factual counterspell costs in order to counter anything is great, but as long as that anything is black or green depending on which one you play. However, these are at the bottom because they're enchantments. They're on the table and easy to see coming. Your opponent's not really going to cast spells into this, I'm sorry. Like, they're going to see it, they're going to be like, okay, I'm holding this spell in my hand until that is off the board. Okay. Still, getting someone out of nowhere in an enchantment deck or your mono black or green deck feels great. Next is Warping Wail at number 9. This is the first truly colorless card I'm covering, I think. Like, we've had generic artifacts, but this one is the first with colorless in its mana cost. It costs 1 generic mana and 1 colorless, meaning you have to pay colorless mana in order to cast it. You get a choice. You can either make an Eldrazi spawn, which is a token you can sacrifice for mana later, or you can exile a creature with power or toughness 1 or less, which isn't always super powerful, but when it is, it can really disrupt an opponent's game plan. Speaking of disruption, the last mode is countering a sorcery spell, which is why it's on this list. Considering a good amount of Haymakers in Commander are sorceries, this can quickly counter any of them. And considering you can cast this off a Temple of the False God, no one would ever see this coming. The downside is it is limited specifically to sorcery spells. It's not countering, like, say, a big creature spell or a counter spell that's countering your stuff. And power 1 or less or toughness 1 or less isn't always available. There's a lot of easier ways to pump your creatures in this game, but I still think Warping Wail is a great card. Staying in the colorless lane is Not of This World at number 8. It's a whopping 7 mana for an instant that counters a spell that targets a permanent you control. Now, some of the white spells that do this sort of thing didn't quite make the list, but the reason I like this card is due to the fact that if the spell this spell is countering is targeting your creature that has at least 7 power, it's 100% free. That's a lot of asterisks to put against that card. That's a lot of ifs. Tons of decks end up having huge creatures, and being able to stop removal spells, exile effects, and the like, it's fantastic. And hey, if you have to pay 7 mana to protect your powerful planeswalker or artifact or some other permanent that you really need, sometimes you just gotta do that. so Not of This World is fantastic to me. Following that massive spell is number 7 in Guttural Response. For a red-green hybrid mana, which means you can pay a red or a green, you get an instant that counters a blue instant spell. This one is very narrow, but if you're playing a deck with red and green, more often than not, a counterspell or a big draw spell in blue could be the difference between you winning or losing the game. Counter it and make sure you win. Also, if you haven't used this to counter an overloaded Cyclonic Rift, you haven't really played Commander. It's fantastic to do so. Next up is Burnout at number 6. For 1 in a red, you get an instant that does the same thing as Guttural Response, and it's a bit more expensive. Okay, why did I put this at number 6? Oh, well, because not only can it go into more decks since it's only red, whereas Guttural Response has to be red or green, it also draws you a card. So if you're looking for effects like this that can afford that extra mana, give Burnout a consideration. Following that is Withering Boon at number 5. For 1 in a black, you get an instant that counters a creature spell as long as you pay 3 life. Now this one is a bit odd as black is very good at killing creatures, so why bother with including a bad counterspell? Well, sometimes creatures have extremely strong enters the battlefield effects, or would be too hard to remove once they hit the board. If you've ever tried to get rid of something that has indestructible or hexproof, or watched helplessly as a Thassa's Oracle is on the stack, you really wish you had your Withering Boon in the back pocket. Sometimes you've just gotta counter the spell, and Withering Boon is sometimes just the surprise you need. Moving into some of the more popular spells that we've seen, we have Tibalt's Trickery at number 4. This one's a bit weird. For 1 in a red, you get an instant that counters any spell. Then they mill 1, 2, or 3 cards at random. Then there's a whole bunch of text. The too long didn't read version is they reveal until they hit a different spell and then they can cast that one. This card is the embodiment of red. Very high upside, but with potentially a very high downside as well. Countering any spell is great, but there's always the potential something bigger is hiding underneath the top of the deck. But that's red for you. If you're not a fan of taking risks, maybe don't play red. That's the best advice I could give you there. Next up at number 3 is Mana Tithe. For 1 white mana, you get an instant that counters a spell unless its owner pays 1 mana. This is a very simple effect, but in the early game, when people are tapping all out in order to make big plays, or when somebody puts a bunch of mana into a giant X spell, a simple 1 mana tax may be more than some people can contend with. For number 2, it's Lapse of Certainty. For 2 and a white, you get an instant that counters a spell. The catch being that the spell goes to the top of the library instead of going to the graveyard. Lapse is perfect as an emergency button in white decks because it's a counterspell that can hit anything. It then lets you untap and prepare for the next time the spell hits the table. Or if you have any sort of milling shenanigans, you can put it at the graveyard by taking the long way around. Finally, at number 1 is a Shared Spot. Pyroblast plus Red Elemental Blast are both a single red mana to counter a blue spell or destroy a blue permanent. Blue is arguably the second most popular color in Commander, right after green, so it's rare that these won't have a target. And unlike the other spells on this list that get worse once the relevant spell has resolved, these can still blow up blue permanents as well, making them perform double duty, and that's why they're number 1. But hey, tell me, what do you think? Are there any other niche counterspells that aren't in blue that I didn't list here? Let me know down in the comments below. And hey, while you're down there, be sure to leave me a like and a subscribe. Lets me know that I'm doing a good job and keeps this show on the road. And as always, thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, au revoir!